And everything was done on a straight line, 11,800-foot road runway. And after conducting the texting tests, they had the subjects at 35 to 70 miles an hour do the texting, and then they drank alcoholic beverages. And of course, this is only to the legal limit. We're not talking about people who really indulge in alcoholic beverages and then decide to drive. But they actually performed worse texting sober than they did driving to the legal limit. So a lot of times people, and especially young teenagers I know, will say, well, I'm not driving drunk, I'm not driving under the influence of drugs, I'm just talking to my friends. And what are some of the ways that we can, as a society, convince and educate people about the real dangers and how much it does take away from your ability to drive when you speak or text on the phone? Maybe you could talk about that a little first, Brian.
Unfortunately, we as human beings do one thing fairly well, do two things not so well, and do three things really poorly. So if we're just driving and we're moderately awake and alert and all that, we have a tendency to get from point A to point B fairly safely. Well, if I'm driving and thinking about something, most of the time we're fine, but we definitely do see some decrements in performance. As I try to manage multiple demands, the human brain is not really good from an attentional standpoint of dealing with that. Things begin to degrade. As we text, we have cognitive distraction and cognitive issues and thought processes around what am I reading, what am I talking about, what do I want to say, and emotion playing as well. Obviously, many of the messages that are going back and forth are highly emotional. Then the activity and the manipulative activity of typing, well, that's a problem too, but it's not the only problem. It's really what we focus on because it's visible and observable. But all of the things that I'm doing, well, all I can do really well as a human is one thing at a time. As soon as I try to multitask, all of the basic psychological literature will tell you that performance begins to degrade. We can do one thing well. We can do two things okay. We don't do three or four things at once, whether that's typing, whether that's studying, whether that's listening to the radio, or it's driving.
Right. So maybe we should tell people to stop multitasking in other ways.
In many ways, that would be great, but life's too short and we don't have enough time, so that's not going to work either. But how do we begin to understand what am I good at and how do I personally manage the demands on a day-to-day basis or situation-by-situation basis and triage things? I'm driving. It's busy. It's raining, or winter's coming. It's snowing. Well, this time I need to prioritize driving. I shouldn't be playing with the radio, the navigation system, talking on the phone. I should be working on driving. Well, different situations, the risks change, and we're very poor judges. Education is one critical component of getting everybody throughout the lifespan to begin to understand some of these trade-offs.
Education is absolutely the number one part of this, because even legislation is really part of education. Right. It's a subset of education. I mean, you're not going to stop the behavior. You're not going to stop people from speeding by the fact that there's a law that says you can't speed. But the more you educate people as to how unsafe that behavior is, in this case texting, I think some people are going to say, I'm just not going to do that. I refuse to do that.
I wish there was a technological solution that would help us and teach us and when to engage and when to not engage. Because education is very difficult. It works very slowly. And I think some of our conversation earlier around drunk driving, seatbelt laws, well, education over a long period of time has done wonders there. We see seatbelt rates very high, drunk driving, as it should be labeled as a very poor driving activity. And I think texting will make it there. But education over a longer period of time and getting the word out, getting people, youth groups, parents to understand, well, texting, emailing, BlackBerries, entering information, looking off the road in general is not a good thing while you're trying to drive.
The driving attitude course that we present is a National Safety Council program, and we present it every Saturday here in the state of New Hampshire in usually 2 or 3 locations, and typically about 3,000 people a year attend the course. A common statement that I hear at the end of the class is everybody should be made to take this. Young drivers before their license should be required to take this. This should be an add-on after driver's education before they get their license, because it really looks at attitude. It's based on the fact that there are 5 basic human needs that motivate all human behavior. Dr. William Glasser maintains that the need to survive, the need for love and belonging, the need for power, freedom, and fun are what motivates everything we do, and driving is just another thing that we do. And when we look at that, and we start taking a look at why people are doing it, and they realize that they're part of that equation, all of a sudden folks sit up and start giving it at least a real thought. The idea of distracted driving is part of what we talk about, and there's this film from Scotland or Britain that, on texting, that is very effective, and yet what's even more effective is I have a video that goes back 8 or 9 years, but the same kinds of crashes are happening day in and day out in our country. The story of a little 2-year-old girl, Morgan Lee, bouncing up and down on her bed, singing, laughing, doing what children ought to be doing. And she went, her mother took her to visit her cousin, and somebody on the cell phone goes through the stop sign, broadsides the car, and little Morgan Lee is dead. And the idea of somebody watching the story of a little 2-year-old losing her life because somebody else wanted to use a cell phone begins to make a difference.
So it really hits home.
And I find that, at least for the moment, folks leave the classroom committed to not repeating that behavior, to somehow accepting the fact that their text messages that do nothing more than say, "I love you, honey," or "I'm available to go out tonight at 6," or "What movie are we going to see?" You know, the reality is reassessing priority. And is it a priority to tell somebody while I'm driving that I can't go out until 7, compared to doing whatever I can do to keep everybody safe, including little ones like Morgan Lee?
Absolutely. And sometimes, you know, people can be convinced for those brief conversations we have with our loved ones that they can wait. But let's talk about the professional that has to work and be on the road, because a lot of the parents of some of these teenagers will blatantly say, honestly, I have to be on the phone. I'm in sales, or I'm doing this. I have to work. And they say that it's okay because they're using a hands-free device. Let's talk a little bit about that, whether or not one form is really safer than the other, or if all of these behaviors should really be reprioritized and taken out of the car environment. I know you were talking about this a little bit before we went on air, Brian. So.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to just talk about the education side for 1 second. Just say, you know, most of us get our licenses at 16, 17, depending on what state we're in, and we get some form of driver education at that point. Beyond that point, the vehicle is changing, and if we look over the last 30 years, the safety systems in the car have changed dramatically. The amount of information flow from pneumatic devices as well as other interfaces are changing. But the operator is getting no more information, no education about how all this happens. In Europe, when you get a car, in Germany in particular, it's an event. It's a full day experience to take delivery on a vehicle in Germany. You learn about the systems. You learn about the safety systems, the technology, the interfaces. In the US, here are your keys. Go for a ride. So lifelong driver education is a key to technology, from distraction, etc. From the cellular phone side, a lot of us are very familiar with the debates around hands-free cellular phone conversations or handheld cellular phone conversations. By and large, when you take off the act of dialing, and obviously manipulative dialing is a component in itself, and relatively brief component. Dialing takes fractions or a few seconds. By and large, the longest time I'm engaged in a conversation, whether it's through a handheld device or a hands-free device, the cognitive components of that conversation are the same. In essence, the research really has begun to show very clearly that the conversation is the problem, not the medium in which we have that conversation, being it through a Bluetooth device or holding a phone up to your ear. The type of conversation I have over a cellular phone or hands-free device is a conversation that has a tendency to be paced by somebody who is not contextually aware of what I'm doing. Well, sometimes they do know that I'm driving, but it's not quite socially acceptable yet to say, I'm driving, hold on, I need to take care of what I'm responsible for here.